Hello, my name is Helen Pennypacker, and my presentation is on the life of Martin Luther King, Jr. I will use the analytic scope of Bronfenbrenner's bioecological systems theory to relay information about this famous leader's life. Adjectives such as brave, peaceful, determined, and compassionate describe Martin Luther King, Jr. Throughout his life, the roles of being a son, Christian, student, minister, husband, civil rights activist leader, author, and Nobel Peace Prize winner impacted his influence on the world. Please listen on to hear how the life of Martin Luther King Jr. is analyzed through Bronfenbrenner's PPCT, or Process, Person, Context, and Time model. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, in Atlanta, Georgia. His parents, Reverend Michael King Sr. and Alberta Williams King, originally named him Michael Luther King. However, a few years after being born, Michael and his father had their names changed to Martin. They were named after the great German Protestant religious leader, Martin Luther. The change of their names is just one example of how religion played a large role in their lives. However, his commitment to his religious beliefs waxed and waned during the later part of his adolescence. I will discuss how family, religion, race, and living in the South were rooted in the life of Martin Luther King Jr. throughout this presentation. The process system's main objective is to explain how an individual interacts with people, objects, and symbols in their immediate external environment. Martin's adolescent processes began with his family and social interactions throughout his childhood. Through interacting with his fun-loving mother and his serious but intelligent father, Martin was able to make sense of this world and understand his place in it. Growing up, Martin was able to learn the value of justice and dignity. Although his parents would become angry over segregation, they did not physically show it. His parents served as role models and made him believe that he was as good as anyone, even when many others said that he was not. Martin spent much of his childhood attending the church of his father, who was the minister. His father's sermons captivated him and inspired him to acquire an extensive vocabulary of his own. His love of words and communication with others came in handy when Martin was just 14 years old and entered and won a speech competition. His speech was titled "The Negro and the Constitution." While heading home on a high from his celebration of winning the competition with his speech teacher, a white person approached Martin and his teacher and asked them to move to the back of the bus. This demand insulted Martin to the core, especially after just delivering a speech on the rights that blacks have as citizens of the United States. Martin is quoted as saying, "That night will never leave my memory. It was the angriest I have ever been in my life." This incident sparked the next phase of the civil rights leader process, and Martin knew then that he had to do something to try and get the Jim Crow laws abolished. Finally, the process of Martin developing throughout his adolescent years did not come without some hiccups along the way. First of which, Martin was a very competitive boy and detested losing and would do almost anything to win. Although Martin is now known for his nonviolent ways of enforcing change, that was not always the case. As an adolescent, Martin had his share of fistfights with peers. Stephen Oates, author of Let the Trumpet Sound, stated that he never battled with knives and stones, as lower-class boys often did, and he preferred negotiation to fights. But if negotiation failed, Martin's ritual remark was, "Let's go to the grass," and he tore into his adversary. End quote. Lastly, Martin was very close to his grandmother, Jenny Williams. When his grandmother suddenly passed away from a heart attack, Martin did not handle the news well at all. He was only 12 years old at the time, and this traumatic event occurred, and he was not only upset over losing his grandmother, but also at the fact that he was disobeying his parents' wishes when she had passed away. Distraught at this news and for disappointing his parents, Martin jumped out of a second-story window in his family's home, allegedly attempting suicide. This was not only the first attempt of suicide for Martin. Shortly after this incident, Martin and his brother were roughhousing and caused his mother to fall hard to the ground. When she did not awake from her fall right away, Martin attempted the same thing by jumping out the same window in his family's home. These acts of violence and difficulty with coping with stress and grief are out of character for the Martin we know today in our history books. However, these processes throughout his adolescence did impact his life and career. According to Bronfenbrenner's theory, there are 3 types of characteristics that should be considered when analyzing a person. The first of which are demand characteristics, such as age, gender, skin color, and physical appearance. For Martin Luther King Jr., his race had a big impact on his life. At a young age, Martin learned the pain of racial discrimination. As a young child, Martin would spend time playing with a young white boy in his neighborhood. Martin and the neighbor boy were just about to start school, and Martin went to the boy's house to play with him. However, this time when the boy's parents answered the door, they told Martin that he was no longer allowed to play with their son. Kathy Lambert, author of a book titled Martin Luther King Jr., stated, "Hurt and confused, Martin went home and told his mom what the white people had said. She stopped what she was doing and spent several hours explaining the black history of slavery and the laws of segregation. She told Martin that you must never feel that you were less than anybody else. You must feel that you are somebody." End quote. Race played a monumental role in Martin's adolescence. His mother's patience and heartfelt delivery of the history of their heritage and culture inspired Martin to see change and equality for all people. Some resource characteristics included Martin's family's comfortable financial livelihood. Unlike many other families growing up during the Great Depression, Martin's family owned their own home and automobile, and they lived a very comfortable lifestyle. Martin attended an all-black, all-male college called Morehouse College at the age of 15. During this time, Martin was conflicted with how he wanted his life to unfold. His father wanted Martin to follow in his footsteps and become a minister. However, Martin was unsure if he wanted to be a minister after all. Martin did not like the shouting and stomping that occurred at most Baptist churches. However, Dr. Benjamin Mays, president of Morehouse College, is accredited with helping Martin make the decision to become a minister after all. Martin saw in Mays a vision of a real minister. He was eloquent, erudite, and committed to improving the lot of Black Americans. Finally, Gandhi played the biggest force characteristic in Martin's life. Martin was inspired by Gandhi's nonviolent resistance against political injustice. Rita Hakeem, author of Martin Luther King Jr. and the March Toward Freedom, is quoted as saying, "Gandhi believed in using love, not hate, in the struggle against India's enemies." End quote. This sense of using love to conquer hate, in addition to his deep Christian faith and beliefs, were strong motivating factors in the work of Martin Luther King Jr. Context is a third part of Bronfenbrenner's theory. Through examining Martin's context or environments, I was able to find various systems that impacted his adolescence and career as a civil rights leader. Martin was surrounded by religious discussion both at home and at church. His family was very actively involved in the church and had open discussions concerning their faith and beliefs. Another contextual factor that impacted the life of Martin was the exosystem of the community in which he lived. John F. Wolkowitz, author of The Importance of Martin Luther King Jr., wrote, "In many ways, Martin experienced a typical life for youth of his day. The one glaring exception, and it made all the difference, was that he grew up Black in the South, where society handed all the advantages to whites. Society, according to King, dished out daily reminders that he occupied an inferior status to whites." End quote. Martin knew that things could never come to his people in this world if they went on expecting life as it was. By growing up in the South, he served as a leader to encourage his congregations to participate in civil rights organizations to try and achieve equality. The last part of Bronfenbrenner's theory and PPCT model is time. While analyzing Martin's life, I will focus on macro time. Macro time refers to how developmental processes can be linked to historical events that happen in an individual's life. During the latter part of Martin's adolescence, segregation against blacks was among one of the biggest problems in his life. During the early 1950s, segregation in schools in the South was legal. When Martin attended Crozer Seminary in Pennsylvania, he experienced being part of an integrated school for the very first time. It was at this school that he first felt appreciated and accepted in a school setting. Another impactful moment in Martin's life were the bus boycotts. When Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on the bus to a white man, she was arrested. Martin, along with E.D. Nixon and his minister friend Ralph Abernathy, helped to change the Montgomery segregated bus system. Martin, along with other powerful black leaders, were able to organize a bus boycott for 382 days that ended with the Supreme Court ruling that Alabama's bus laws were unconstitutional. Macro time made a huge impact on Martin's life. Segregation, inequality, and racism were issues of his time, and he successfully led thousands of people to challenge these issues in nonviolent ways. Although Martin Luther King Jr. preached and taught others about obtaining your civil rights in peaceful ways, his own life was cut short while serving as a leader. On April 4, 1968, while standing on the balcony of his motel room in Memphis, Tennessee, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. He was an integral part of the civil rights movement and made a huge impact on the world. Thank you for taking the time to examine the life of Martin Luther King Jr. through the analytic scope of Bronfenbrenner's bioecological systems theory. Please see my reference list on my D2L post. Thank you.